Next on KQED Newsroom, will California schools make the grade with new curriculum requirements and funding formulas? The rimfire, lessons, and controversy 1 year later. Plus, how Robin Williams helped make San Francisco a comedy empire.
I'm home. God, it's good to be home. I'm not lying. I can't lie to you. It's so nice to be home where the birds don't wake up and call.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy. It's not just kids who are getting ready to hit the books. California schools will be put to the test this year as well with two major policy changes. First, California's new funding formula devised by Governor Jerry Brown. It puts local districts in control of how they spend education funding and provides more money for low-income students and English learners. Also, the National Common Core standards take full effect this school year. They drastically change how students are taught and tested. Joining me now for an explanation are California State School Board President Michael Kirst and Jill Tucker, San Francisco Chronicle education reporter. Michael, let's begin with you. The new so-called local control funding formula is a dramatic shift for school districts. Can you explain how it works and why is it needed?
The old system of financing was really an historical accretion going back to the 1960s. It had no underlying rationale. It did not adjust for different pupil needs. It was convoluted and almost impossible to understand. And it relied on lots of state earmarks telling schools to spend money on librarians or school gardens or remedial reading teachers or whatever.
All dictated from Sacramento on a statewide
heavily
level.
Dictated from Sacramento, and we had 41 of these categorical programs which consumed about a third of the budget. So the change we made was to really throw all that out and start over. So now, essentially, you get a target for spending, and for low income districts, you'll get about 50% more per pupil over the next 5 to 6 years. So you get a base amount. If you have low income children or English learners who are not low income, most are, or foster care children, you get 20% more. And if you have a concentration, like say Oakland, of more than 55% of these pupils, you get even more money, a much bigger jump of money, about 50% more. So it makes it much more pupil directed. It's adjusted for grades. You get a little bit more money for elementary schools than secondary schools.
So it's a big change.
It does all these things, yeah.
How dramatic is this shift, Jill? I mean, you've been covering education for many years.
Yeah, I don't want to say how many, but yeah. I never thought that I would see this change in my career. The old formula, as Mike said, was so convoluted but so embedded in Sacramento. And this new local control funding formula, it basically just completely tossed out the old system. And I just never thought that I would see Sacramento get that momentum to take something that was so embedded in what, layers of policy and political desires and in the hands of Sacramento, and to say, we're cutting all that and we're throwing the cash at the school districts, almost no strings attached, and saying, we want you to focus on these higher need kids.
So the momentum is there, but there are definitely concerns as well. Schools already have their plans in place on how to spend this money. Are they sound plans? Are there accountability factors built in?
Well, the law requires that every district have a plan in place of how they're going to spend the money, and specifically the money for low-income kids or English learners or foster children. And so those plans are in place. They were made with community feedback, parent feedback. I think the concerns that a lot of people have, though, and it was under the old system as well, was how do you follow the money? Is it transparent enough? Will this money truly get to the kids who really need it? Or will it be gobbled up by special interests in the community or at school district or schools individually, for salaries, for example, which is a fear. I think many school districts have really good plans. Some are a little harder to understand. And I think, but transparency and will this money actually get to those kids and make a difference?
Well, how are teachers responding? Teachers unions, administrators, and I think there is a concern by some civil rights groups out there that with middle-class parents and teachers unions being politically powerful, that this money could be diverted into other things.
Well, the law requires a lot of community and parental participation. School districts have run, scores of meetings with the communities. They've never been involved in a local budgeting before like this. Los Angeles started out wanting to reduce their deficit and ended up with a formula that distributes it to low-income schools. So we've really changed public participation, and the conversation's much more about how the resources will improve pupil outcomes. The old system told you how to spend the money, but didn't hold you for what you were trying to do with it as explicitly.
And it allows for a lot more flexibility at a local level, because in the past I used to say that they would give you money if you wanted to buy pink curtains, but you could only get the money if you bought pink curtains or whatever it was, textbooks or whatever. Now, each district is able to say, we don't need that. We don't need textbooks. What we really need are librarians or literacy tutors. And another district may say, we want something else.
So that's the funding component, but this is also happening at the same time that California is joining about 44 other states in fully implementing the federal Common Core standards this year. What is the purpose of Common Core, and how will it change the way students are taught?
Well, I think, we've been implementing Common Core now for several years, and I think there's still a lot of confusion out there. The Common Core standards are just that, they're standards, which means it kind of says what kids should learn in each grade. Now, how they learn that, or what the curriculum is, what the textbook is, what the materials they have, what math problems they solve, is very much a local issue, down to the school level or the school district level. And so it really is just shaking up a little bit of what kids are taught when. So under Common Core, you start bringing algebraic concepts in at the early grades, kindergarten, first grade, and those are maintained in a sequence as the kids get older. So it focuses a lot more on critical thinking and they're
and showing and demonstrating things
showing
as opposed to a multiple choice.
Yeah, it's supposed to get,
test.
As opposed to doing 20 questions of long division, they might look at how you would use long division to create a garden of strawberries.
And the testing is going to be done via computers. And how is that going to work? My understanding is that it will toss out different follow-up questions based on how you answer. Is that right?
Right. We're going from paper and pencil to all computer adaptive. So it'll be on the computer, and if we give you difficult questions and you're answering them, it gives you more difficult questions. And if you're having trouble, it takes you down and gives you easier questions. Moreover, each student will get between an hour and a half of a performance exam. This is sort of like driving the car for your driver's test rather than just answering a multiple choice test. Mm-hmm. And this test will be something like a problem on nuclear power, what you think. It'll have you read various things. You'll have to look at that. You'll have to come up with your own views. You'll have to draw from the facts in the articles or pieces of research you're reading. So it's a whole new ballgame. Very, very different kind of assessment theory and assessment implementation.
So the standards sound like they're going to be tougher than what schools are traditionally accustomed to. But if you have a system where students and teachers are used to teaching and learning the old way, are they going to be ready for these new standards?
Well, they'll be ready, I think, quicker than we think, but it'll take a number of years. We're really looking for 3 or 4 years of phase-in until this is finally done. We did that with our old assessment system. So I think they're partially ready, and I think once they see the assessment, they'll really believe what they have to do.
Yeah, we're still getting, we're still seeing the curriculum getting into schools. Again, the standards are out there, but what the books are or what materials teachers use, those are still being developed or still being incorporated into the classroom. So we're still seeing a lot of teacher training on the new standards, new curriculum used. This year it's definitely going to be an interesting year watching it get implemented and then have the kids go into the testing of it.
And Michael, just real quickly, I know this is supposed to close the achievement gap, but if you have a system where, maybe not all teachers and students are ready, do you think that it will actually close the gap or widen it? Just real quickly here.
Yeah, I think it will bring all students up over time to a level where they're much better able to succeed in post-secondary education or in job training, and so I think we'll get kids to a much higher threshold and base. Okay. I think after that you'll see more gap closing. All
right, we'll have to leave it there. Michael Kirst, California State School Board President, thank you, and also thanks to you as well. Jill Tucker, San Francisco Chronicle education reporter. And coming up, remembering Robin Williams and how he put San Francisco on the map for comedy. But first, it's been a year since the Rim Fire scorched 400 square miles in Yosemite and surrounding areas. It's the largest recorded fire in the Sierra Nevada. This week, a hunter pleaded not guilty to charges that he started it with an illegal campfire. KQED science reporter Lauren Sommer recently visited the area to see firsthand the lingering impact and to report on restoration efforts. I spoke with her earlier. Lauren, welcome to the program.
Hi.
You recently returned from your visit to the area destroyed by the Rim Fire. How do things look there now?
It's still a really dramatic landscape. I mean, for folks driving up to Yosemite, you'll definitely notice. This was a huge fire. It was really characterized by these patches of severe burn. So when you go there, you see these trees completely charred, no pine needles left. It's a really intense thing to see. But we are seeing signs of recovery now. You kind of see this carpet of bright green on the ground, ferns and oak trees, plants that are starting to come back. So it's still very dramatic, but a year later, things are starting to improve.
Well, if you look back at the fire, it was so huge. I mean, 400 square miles of timberland were charred. That's a lot of dead trees. What is the U.S. Forest Service proposing to do about that now?
Yeah, the concern is that these trees are going to stand for maybe a decade, maybe longer, but after that, they're going to fall down. And so their concern is that having all these trees on the ground is really going to be a fire risk. When the next fire comes through, all that fuel will make it more intense. And so what they're proposing to do is to allow logging companies to come in, and they would be able to harvest the trees in about 44,000 acres. Obviously, the logging companies, they're excited about that. They think it would be a boost to kind of the local economy. Now, the pushback that we're starting to get is from environmental groups, and they say there's a lot of wildlife that uses these dead trees as habitat, in particular the blackback woodpecker. They live in the trees, they eat the insects, and this is a really rare habitat type that they think really needs to stay on the landscape to protect these species. So that's where we're starting to see the fight.
And how much of this is a quandary for the U.S. Forest Service? Because its mandate is really multi-purpose. On the one hand, it is to provide wildlife habitat, which makes the environmentalists very happy. But its other mandate is also to produce timber. So how are they going to resolve that?
Yeah, this is kind of the internal struggle of the Forest Service, that it's been this way for decades. They call themselves a multi-use agency, right? They have to kind of satisfy a lot of different people. The interesting thing is that, part of this fire burned in Yosemite National Park, and they don't have the same mandate, right? They're there to protect kind of the ecosystem. And so the management styles have been very different in both places.
So in addition to the salvage idea, and the salvage operation is huge, it would be one of the largest federal salvage efforts in California in years. But in addition to that, is there a reforestation plan in place or in the works as well?
Yeah, that's something they're working on right now, because obviously if they're going to take out a lot of these dead trees, they're going to have an area that they're going to want to replant. This is a really standard policy, and after big fires in the West, they've been doing this for a lot of years, where they'll come in, plant trees pretty close together, about 10 feet apart. They're called tree plantations. And actually, when I was visiting the Rim Fire last fall, just as it had burned through, I went to one of these tree plantations that had gone in after 1987. There's some fires that happened up there. And there was a big sign thanking all the donors who had made it possible to kind of replant these trees. And of course, right behind the sign, all the trees were completely scorched. The Rim Fire had kind of burned right through these dense trees. And so there are a lot of people that are starting to say, well, maybe let's look at the way we're replanting. Maybe it's too dense. Maybe we're helping the fire along. And so there's a lot of discussion about maybe trying to plant trees in a way that mimics the historical patterns that we see in the forest. You know, we've had decades of Smokey Bear, right? Fire suppression. These forests have gotten really dense. And so they're saying if we're going to replant trees, maybe let's try planting them in kind of more open gaps, groups, kind of these areas that maybe mimic the historical forests as opposed to these dense plantations.
So perhaps a silver lining here in that we are learning some lessons as a result of this fire.
Yeah, certainly it's such a high-profile fire, you know, obviously with Yosemite being involved. So there are a lot of people saying, you know, maybe this is an opportunity to look at some of the policies that have been in place for decades and think about how we really want to do things.
And just real quickly, I'm curious, so much of the economy around that area revolves around tourism. Has that been able to bounce back at all?
Yeah, it's a huge concern up there because obviously the summer is when people are visiting Yosemite, and those businesses make most of their money in the summer months. So they felt they took a huge hit last year. There's been a little bit more optimism this year, but things are getting better. But there was another fire just a few weeks ago outside Yosemite, and so it's definitely a concern that businesses are feeling up there, and they want people to come back and visit.
Well, let's hope they do, because the folks around there and the businesses could definitely use the visitors.
Yep.
All right, Laura Sommer, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
As the world struggles to come to grips with the death of Robin Williams, here in the Bay Area, we mourn the loss of one of our own.
Hello.
Williams helped to establish and support San Francisco as a comedy capital in the 1980s, with a thriving club scene that included the Holy City Zoo, the Other Cafe, and the Punchline. During the 1980s and 90s, KQED produced 10 seasons of a popular comedy series called Comedy Tonight. It featured performances by up-and-comers, including Dana Carvey, Whoopi Goldberg, and Ellen DeGeneres.
The stewardesses bother me. They're the worst. Who is anyone a stewardess in here? Who would have this job? They walk around, they're wearing so much makeup, you just want to walk up and say, "Excuse me, how small is your head without the makeup?"
Scott Schaefer sat down with former Comedy Tonight producer Frank Zamacona to reminisce about Robin Williams and that golden era of comedy in the city.
Frank Zamacona, it's clear from the outpouring of emotion this week in the Bay Area just how Robin Williams touched so many people's lives, nowhere more than in the world of comedy.
That's right.
Take us back to the 1980s when you were producing Comedy Tonight right here on KQED. What was it like, and how did he fit into that?
Well, you know, during that period in the 80s, all the comedians seemed to migrate to San Francisco, whether from Boston, like Paula Poundstone, from the Midwest, you had Dana Gould, you had Bobby Slayton from New York. Everybody came here to get their chops together because the audience here in San Francisco would welcome them, open up to them, and you could do anything you wanted to do.
And what role did Robin Williams have in creating that? Because he obviously found that here as well.
Right. Well, he was a local, so he did anything he wanted and saw that. Whether he worked at the boarding house with David Allen, or even there's a couple of North Beach places that he performed at that are no longer there. The Intersection, but these places audiences hip. San Francisco had hip audiences even then, believe it or not. But they would open up, and he could do anything, and he saw that. And of course, he developed his improv skills, and he went to Juilliard, of course. So
and he dropped out to come back here and do stand-up.
Do stand-up, and
yeah.
He was just open arms here. The audience had open arms, and he just developed that. And he could be who we wanted to be.
Yeah. What did he do for the reputation? Are you saying that all these people who came here, the Bobby Slaytons, the Paula Poundstones, and others, came here in part because of him and what he created here?
Yeah, part of that. He was really an icon. I mean, obviously he auditioned at the Holy City Zoo for Mork and Mindy, and boom, he got it. So wow, people said, hey,
it's a good launching pad.
It's a good launching pad. So, you know, but the comedy scene here had so many clubs. There was maybe 10, 12 clubs, and then you had another 6 or 7 that were part-time. So that whole scene just exploded.
I remember, I think it was New Year's Eve, 1981. I was at a show at the Other Cafe in Coal Valley.
Right.
And I think it was Paul Poundstone was the headliner. And who walks in at around midnight but Robin Williams? And he pops up on stage unannounced, riffs, has a great time. How often did that kind of thing happen? And to what extent was he doing it to kind of be supportive of his fellow comedians?
That happened a lot. I mean, he wanted to support clubs, whether it was John Fox and Ann Fox at the Punchline, whether it was Comedy Day and Jose Simone and Frank Kidder at the comedy competition. He would show up everywhere. The Other Cafe and Bob Ayers and Chip Romer, the Holy City Zoo, of course, which is world famous with John Cantu and Tony DePaul. I mean, he would support all those clubs, and I don't want to forget Tom Sawyer at Cobb's too, because Tom,
which is still up and running.
It's still up and running, and certainly he supported the clubs, the comedians. You would see him in the audience supporting various comedians, and obviously putting together acts like he and Bobcat did, I think, a couple weeks at Cobb's, and it was just, he was just so supportive and part of the community.
He had such a unique style, of course, these hilarious stream of consciousness riffs, and the voices, and it was zany and unscripted, of course. To what extent did people, do you think, try to emulate that? I don't know that you could, even if you wanted to, because that was such a unique brilliance that he had. But to what extent did his style, whether it was just the carefree, unscripted nature of what he was doing with comedy, did it rub off on others?
Yeah, I think, you could see some of that in Jim Carrey and maybe Bobcat a little bit, Bobcat Goldthwait. You could see that craziness, that zaniness, not only the verbal communication and improv, but the nonverbal, and
it was very physical comedy.
Oh, very physical comedy, and he wouldn't be afraid of going into the audiences. I mean, that was a big part of it, and he would love that. He would love to riff off the audience. I worked on his first HBO special at the Great American Music Hall, and he had a list. He had a list of what he wanted to do, but then he would move all that stuff around every night. He did 2 nights, and he would move it around when it was suited, when it was right, when he felt right.
The early reviews of him, his very early stuff, not all that well reviewed. He actually entered and did not win a comedy competition early in his career. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was one of the first. It was the first one, and it was Bill Farley eventually won it. And where is he? Hey, Bill, you're okay. You're still okay. And Robin came in second, and the lights went down, in the club. And what happened was that Bill Farley said, "Okay, when the lights go on, everybody sing Happy Birthday," and the lights went on, and boom, and that moment, that improv moment, won it for Bill, and Robin came in second, and another San Franciscan, Bob Sarlott, came in third.
Sometimes, as like on American Idol, the second place finisher does pretty well.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I'm sure there's going to be some sort of a public memorial for Robin Williams, and so many people will want to participate in that. But what do you think is his legacy on the scene here in the Bay Area?
Well, I think on the scene in the Bay Area, Bill Graham was huge worldwide, and he's missed. Jerry Garcia certainly is missed worldwide. And I think Robin will be missed worldwide because he touched everybody. And comedy, I feel comedy is an art form, and he was at the pinnacle of that art form. And to make anybody laugh, to make everyone laugh, put it that way, that's an art. And then when you touch people that way, it's a gift. And he will be missed not only here, but around the world.
And what a wonderful legacy and a trove of clips and movies and stand-up bits that we have. Frank Zamacona, thanks so much for coming in and reminiscing about Robin Williams.
Thank you.
And joining me now for a look at what's coming up on KQED News is Scott Schaefer. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Thuy.
Well, in Sacramento, they went right up to the deadline, but Republicans and Democrats came together to place a $7.5 billion water bond on the November ballot. This replaces a previous $11 billion bond measure. Why did it take them so long to come up with something that they could agree on?
Well, everyone agreed that $11 billion bond was too big, a lot of pork. Governor Brown didn't want a big bond measure because he's running on fiscal responsibility. The last thing he wants is to take on a whole lot more debt and to ask people to do that. But it's really about what Republicans wanted. They had some leverage. Unlike most things up in the state capitol, they had to get a 2/3 vote, so they needed some Republicans to sign on to this. Republicans wanted more water storage, dams, reservoirs, whereas Democrats, they want more money for clean water, restoration of the Delta. So everybody had to give a little bit, get a little bit. and in the end they did come up with something that everybody could live with. In fact, it passed the Senate unanimously and passed with just 2 no votes in the Assembly, and the governor got a big win, and actually all the legislators, Republican and Democrat, are sending out press releases saying what a victory it is. So that rarely happens.
Yeah, a bipartisan compromise. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Just real quickly, though, does this have any impact on Governor Brown's controversial proposal for the twin Delta water tunnels?
That's a separate project. There are some Republicans who worry that some of this money could get, funneled over to the tunnels. We've seen that kind of thing happen before, where a bond measure gets passed and then they find ways to move the money around, but it shouldn't really have anything to do with that.
Speaking of water, you were in the Central Valley this week taking a look at the effects of the drought, talking to farmers, and others. What did you see in terms of the impacts the drought has had there?
Well, it's kind of the best of times and the worst of times. On the one hand, we saw these orange groves where, acres and acres, thousands of oranges just dead because there was no water for them, and the growers decided just to let them die. It was very stark. On the other hand, you could drive down a road and you'd see on the one hand there'd be thriving orange trees, on the other side they'd be dead. Some growers have groundwater and some don't. But clearly, and the farm workers, of course, are feeling it as well. They often don't have enough water even to do their dishes and their bathing.
So if the farmers are not getting water from the state and it's not raining, where are they getting their water from?
Well, largely from, they are getting a little bit from the state, but mostly groundwater. The number of groundwater permits has more than doubled in Tulare County, where we were, in just the last couple of years. And there's no regulation, so they don't know how much water is being drilled, how much is left, how quickly is that big straw sucking up all the water. And so we're seeing some of the land subside a little bit, which has, is a cause for some concern. And there are calls in the legislature to start regulating that. California is one of the states that doesn't. But it is definitely a concern because, as we saw with this one farm worker family, their ground well dried up. They had no options for water.
And in the meantime, the economic impact goes on. I mean, you see signs everywhere still: no water, no jobs.
No water, no jobs. People talking about it everywhere in person and on talk radio and cafes. And we'll have a lot more about this next week, next Friday, on the California Report magazine.
You're doing a whole series of special reports?
We are.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Scott.
You bet.
And for all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.
I'm Scott Schaefer. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Thuy Vu. And please tune in next week for a KQED Newsroom special about rehabilitation for prisoners serving life sentences. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.